Here we are at Belief 17. By now you probably are very aware of changes in your life, but the basic problem, lack of self-confidence and the need to be accepted by others, probably may not yet be totally gone. You may or may not have the last 3 beliefs on this program, although you almost certainly have some of the conditionings that will follow. To make sure you eliminate all the beliefs you actually do have, please check the first few minutes of this and the next 2 beliefs. If you have the beliefs, use the program to eliminate them. If you don't have any of them, just skip to the next belief. In any case, I promise you that your lack of self-confidence and your concern with the opinion of others will be totally gone by the time you're done with this program. Please continue to answer each question out loud to make sure the belief is eliminated. This next belief, people aren't interested in what I have to say, isn't as common as many of the ones you've eliminated so far. But it is one that a large number of people hold. And it's one of the beliefs that generally underlies the fear of speaking up for oneself and asking for what one wants. Here are a few ways to know if you have this belief. Do you get anxious when you talk to people about things that are important to you? Do you get anxious speaking in front of groups? Do you frequently refrain from saying what's on your mind with the thought, people just aren't interested in what I have to say? If you answered yes to any of these questions, you probably have this belief. Remember, you can hold a belief that intellectually you don't think is true about you. Today, as an adult, you might know that people are interested in what you have to say. But just knowing that isn't enough to eliminate the belief. Moreover, it may even be true that some people really aren't interested in what you have to say. Not everyone's interested in what I have to say all the time either. But that is very different than believing that people aren't interested in what I have to say. Ultimately, the way to know if you have this belief is the same way to know if you have any belief. Say the words out loud and pause for a moment. If the words feel true or produce a negative feeling, even a small one, you have the belief. Try it right now. Please say out loud, people aren't interested in what I have to say, and then be still for a moment. Does it feel true or negative at all? If it does, you have the belief. You now know what it feels like to say these words when you have the belief. You'll say the same words out loud at the end of the process and will experience what the same words feel like when you no longer believe the statement. Okay then, let's get rid of people aren't interested in what I have to say. If you're absolutely certain that you don't have this belief, please click Next Belief and proceed to the next belief. If you have the belief, just let the program continue to play. My voice will now stop, so you can write down this belief in the text box on your computer monitor. Click Continue when you're ready to continue with the process to eliminate the belief, people aren't interested in what I have to say. The next step to eliminate a belief is to figure out when you formed it. Most of our beliefs, certainly almost all of our self-esteem beliefs, and this belief, were formed from events involving your parents that occurred when you were a very young child. For most people, the source of the belief people aren't interested in what I have to say is similar to the belief I'm not important. When you were a child, were you frequently unable to get your parents' attention? Were you in a household where children were to be seen and not heard? Did you talk to your parents only to have them give half their attention to you and half to something else? Parents sometimes say things like, I don't care what you want, this is what we're doing. Any of these or similar situations could be the source of this belief. Now take a look at your early life and see where the belief people aren't interested in what I have to say comes from for you. Then type into the text box on the screen the type of things your parents did and said in your childhood that led you to form this belief, people aren't interested in what I have to say. Rather than writing down how you felt, describe the actual situations, what your parents actually said and did, such as, my parents often ignored me when I tried to talk to them. Take the time you need because this is important. When you're done writing, click Continue. Now the program will pause. Look at the events you've written down. Is it real to you that the conclusion you reached, people aren't interested in what I have to say, is a valid interpretation of those events? Can you agree that virtually any child at that age and in those situations would have reached a similar conclusion? Now we're going to play the possibilities game. Well, imagine that 4 friends of yours are visiting you and looking at a videotape of the events you just wrote down. Your interpretation of those events when you were a child was, people aren't interested in what I have to say. That is one valid interpretation of Mom and Dad's behavior. That interpretation wasn't wrong, but there are other reasonable interpretations of the same childhood events that you didn't think of as a child. So let's ask each of your friends for another alternative interpretation. Can you see that one friend might well say, maybe Mom and Dad weren't interested in what you had to say, but that doesn't necessarily mean no one would be interested? Couldn't the events in your childhood be explained by this interpretation, just as well as your interpretation, that people aren't interested in what I have to say? Here's what your second friend says. Maybe people weren't interested in what you had to say as a child. That doesn't mean they never will. Doesn't this interpretation also explain those events in your childhood just as well as your interpretation, that people aren't interested in what I have to say? Here's a third possible interpretation of your childhood events that one of your friends suggests. Maybe Mom and Dad were interested in what you had to say. Their behavior was due to having a lot on their minds most of the time. Doesn't this interpretation also explain those events in your childhood just as well as your interpretation, that people aren't interested in what I have to say? Here's another interpretation from your fourth friend. Your parents didn't listen to you because they had poor parenting skills. They just didn't realize the effect of their not listening. It wasn't because people aren't interested in what I have to say. Couldn't any one of these interpretations explain your childhood interactions with your parents just as well as your interpretation? People aren't interested in what I have to say? Of course they can. So is it real to you that a belief you've lived with almost your entire life, something you thought was a fact, is not a fact, isn't the truth at all? It's only a truth, merely one interpretation of many possible interpretations of earlier events, right? With a little help from me and your friends, you can see that not being able to impact your life as a child could have at least 4 different reasonable interpretations or meanings. Do you remember what you wrote down a few minutes ago as the source of your belief, people aren't interested in what I have to say? Look at the text box below on your screen. Right now, imagine seeing what you saw then and hearing what you heard then. Take a few minutes and really imagine the events of your childhood that led you to forming the belief people aren't interested in what I have to say. Didn't it seem when you were a child as if you could actually see people aren't interested in what I have to say in those early events with your parents? It did, didn't it? You may have the sense that you didn't see the belief, you felt it. Once you formed the belief people aren't interested in what I have to say, you probably did feel it. I'll get back to the feeling in a minute, but what I'd like you to focus on now is not the feeling, but on my question. When your parents didn't pay attention to you, didn't it seem as if you saw people aren't interested in what I have to say? As if you could point to it? As if you could have said to me, Morty, can't you see people aren't interested in what I have to say? I didn't hear you. Did you say yes? Now that you think you saw people aren't interested in what I have to say as a child, I'd like you to look again. Did you really see people aren't interested in what I have to say? If you did, what does people aren't interested in what I have to say look like? Could you really point to it? Does people aren't interested in what I have to say have a color, a shape, location? Is it real to you now that you saw events, but never really did see people aren't interested in what I have to say? If anything you can really see can be described, And if you can't describe what people aren't interested in what I have to say looks like, is it clear now that you never really saw it? Since you never really saw people aren't interested in what I have to say, what did you actually see? Is it clear now that all you really saw was your parents not paying attention to you when you wanted their attention? In other words, all you really saw was a series of events? What happened was that you looked at a series of events that can be interpreted in many different ways. You gave the events one meaning, which was, people aren't interested in what I have to say. By attributing that specific meaning to the events, each time your parents didn't listen to what you had to say, it was as if you could see that meaning in those situations. But you didn't discover the meaning in the events. You gave the meaning to the events. They had no meaning before you created one. Is it real now that the events had no meaning until you gave one to them? Here's another way to understand that events have no inherent meaning. What if I told you that my parents never listened to me when I was little? Aside from that piece of information, do you know anything else for sure about how people will treat me as an adult? Does it mean no one would ever be interested in what I have to say, or even that my parents weren't interested? Is it clear you wouldn't know anything about me, and you don't know anything about how people will treat you as an adult either? All you know for sure is what actually happened. You didn't get your parents' attention a lot of the time. And finally, if you never saw people aren't interested in what I have to say out there in the world, where has it been all these years? Did I hear you say that people aren't interested in what I have to say has only ever existed in your mind? That you never did see it out there in the world? That's right. Now, if the belief is more real to you as a feeling than as a concept, here's another way to look at it. Didn't it seem as if your parents' behavior and comments when you were a child made you feel people aren't interested in what I have to say? But you just agreed that the events have no meaning. Is it possible for events that have no meaning to make you feel people aren't interested in what I have to say, or anything else for that matter? Of course not. So frequently not getting hurt as a child couldn't have made you feel people aren't interested in what I have to say. What did make you feel that? By now I think you know the answer to that question. Please answer out loud. That's right. You felt that only because that's the meaning you already had given to frequently not getting heard. Let me help you make this real. Imagine that I had been there when you were a little child and had helped you realize there were alternative interpretations. And after that conversation you concluded, maybe Mom and Dad aren't interested in what I had to say, but that doesn't necessarily mean no one would be interested. Here's what I'd like you to do now. Take a moment and really imagine being a child and being unable to get Mom and Dad to listen to you. As you imagine the events, apply this different interpretation to their behavior. Notice how it feels to be a child who's thinking, maybe Mom and Dad aren't interested in what I had to say, but that doesn't necessarily mean no one would be interested. You can use the pause button below to pause the video while you make these childhood scenarios more real for yourself. When you're done imagining, press the play button. As you imagine this scene, does it still feel like your parents' words and actions are making you feel people aren't interested in what I have to say? Probably not. And if you didn't feel people aren't interested in what I have to say then, would you feel it now? Again, the answer is no. So Mom and Dad's behavior never caused you to feel people aren't interested in what I have to say. That feeling came from your interpretation of their behavior. And since your feelings were not caused by events in reality, they were only the result of a meaning you made up to explain the events, is it real that the feelings you had when you couldn't get your parents' attention as a child didn't tell you anything at all about whether other people will be interested in what you have to say as an adult? They didn't, did they? Okay, now take a deep breath, let it out slowly, and then say out loud, people aren't interested in what I have to say. Is it the truth? Does it still feel like the truth? Your answer is very important here. Take another deep breath and say, people aren't interested in what I have to say out loud. I bet it feels very different when you say these words now than when you said them at the beginning of this exercise. Do these words feel true, even a little bit? Unless the belief is 100% gone and the words don't feel true at all, you probably still have the belief. Remember, holding a belief is like being pregnant. You either is or you ain't. There's no sort of. If the belief is still there, it probably still seems like you saw it. Once it no longer seems as if you saw people aren't interested in what I have to say in those early events, the belief will be gone. So please click the repeat button to repeat that step of the process. If the belief is gone, please click Continue. Now that you're clear the belief really is gone, let me congratulate you for eliminating your 17th belief. You only have 2 more beliefs and a few conditionings to eliminate, and your lack of self-confidence and your need for others to accept and approve of you will be totally gone for good. But as a result of getting rid of this belief and all the ones that came before, I'll bet you already can see a big change in your feelings and behavior. The little voice that criticizes has become quieter. Your self-doubt has decreased. You've been less concerned about what others think about you. In fact, by now you should start to notice some real changes in your behavior and feelings. Before you move on to the next belief, you might want to revisit the process, who am I really? I'll keep reminding you after you eliminate each belief because it enables you to feel that you're the creator of your life. You experience on a very profound level that anything's possible and you have no limitations. It allows me to remember that I'm not a victim in my life. When something is going wrong, I'm clear that I am the cause of it, which gives me the power. Now you can either click Who Am I Really?, click Next Belief to get rid of another belief, or close this program. Then make a note to yourself when you plan to return and resume the program.